Welcome back to the program. We're discussing the complex relationship between a free press and Islam in the Western world. Joining me to discuss this are Sharif Nashashibi, a journalist and also the chairman of a media watchdog organization that monitors British media coverage in the Arab world. Sharif joins us from London. Suzanne Nossel, the executive director of the PEN American Center organization, which defends freedom of expression in the literary world. Munir Pervaiz Saami, a Canadian Muslim activist. He joins us from Toronto. Thanks to all of you again for joining us. Suzanne, let's go to you first. I want you to respond to what Munir was saying earlier on. And here's the question. When it comes to the Charlie Hebdo attacks, is this satirical newspaper really being consistent here? Because, you know, we had Muslims being denigrated in the last, in several of its issues. But there was an occasion 2 years ago when there was some comments made in that newspaper deemed anti-Semitic, and the person who made those comments refused to apologize when asked to do so by the editor. He was fired.
Well, I'm not sure they were entirely consistent, but that said, you know, this is a private magazine. Its editors are in charge. They have to make their own editorial decisions. We can query and criticize those decisions, but nothing they did justifies violence, justifies people coming in and murdering cartoonists and editors, simply gunning them down. So I think we can criticize their inconsistency, call it out, say that they ought to have perhaps treated different cartoons, you know, that were similar in import in a like way. But that really doesn't undercut the fundamental violation and grave abuse that took place when these individuals were murdered. So I don't think we ought to be too sidetracked on that. You know, it's an important issue that there are certain groups that feel more targeted, unfairly treated, singled out, and there are ways of addressing that through dialogue, through education, through counter speech and counter publication that gives a diversity of views a fair airing. And I think that's the solution there, not to suggest in any way that this could possibly justify an act of violence. Okay,
Munir, you wanted to say.
Yeah, what I want to say here is this, and I agree with Suzanne, that they should not be killed. But here, because Sharif mentioned a comment of mainstream Muslim, as if people like me or my organization who talk about Charlie Hebdo and support them are not mainstream. We work with mainstream every day, and the marginalization we understand. And let me tell you the example of how Canada deals with marginalization here, and especially stereotyping. There have been 2 recent cases in Canada where somebody made some hate speech against the Muslims, and that person has been jailed for 9 months. You can't imagine people jailed for 9 months for raising anti-Muslim comments in many countries. Also, recently, there's a lawyer, Khurram Awan, who went through a case of libel, and he won the case because a very famous publisher in Canada, as a Levant, was libeling against him, and he was fined $80,000. So what I want to mention here, as a mainstream person working with the mainstream community all the times, that these countries are trying to control racism against Muslims through the same laws that they are trying to control racism against the Jews or against the gays.
All right, Sharif, go ahead.
Look, you can cite this example or that example, but there are very credible studies and there are facts available to show that the sense of Muslim alienation in certain countries in the West is very real in terms of the job market, in terms of physical and verbal attacks on the street, in terms of surveillance, particularly of the Muslim community, of how they're treated in airports or on the streets. These are established areas where Muslims feel discriminated against, and they are. So I mean, to belittle this feeling, I think is really very dangerous. Obviously that's not to say that,
Sharif,
that countries in the West are trying to improve things, but this is a very real problem.
Suzanne, I want to get back to something that we just sorry, Munir, I'll get back to. I'll come to you in a moment. I want to go to Suzanne in New York.
No problem.
When we look at the, you know, these murders, these very brutal murders that were carried out in Paris, I mean, there's a very dark and threatening message in that. It's something that you just talked about. And that is that journalists and writers have to be very careful about what they say now in future. It's not new. I mean, we've seen that happen to Salman Rushdie when he was threatened with a fatwa, when there was a threat to kill him. I mean, how dangerous is this for the freedom of speech?
It's very dangerous. I mean, we don't think of cartoonists or writers necessarily as powerful within a society, but when you see an attack like this, you realize the power that they have and the degree to which some people see these cartoons or messages as a real threat. And we've seen other examples was a late-night comedian in Egypt jailed. In Iran jailed. So comedy, because it gets at the very heart of a society, its foibles, the weaknesses of its leaders, can be seen as quite menacing. And we have a lot of work to do to defend the right of satirists to express themselves and expose the rot and the problems at the edges of society. And, I don't think that contradicts the message of the need for mutual respect and respect across religious differences. I think those things are very important, and they can coexist. It's having that underlying foundation of respect that enables the satirists, the cartoonists, to go out on the edge, to say something provocative, to offend, to be at times disrespectful against a backdrop of equal rights and respect for religious differences that ought to pervade society-wide. I don't think those two things need to be seen as at odds.
And you make the point there.
Can I just add to that?
Sure,
sorry,
Sharif,
to what Suzanne said.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't an issue of you're either with free speech or you're against it. I mean, we of course we are all freedom of speech, but what we have to talk about is the responsibility that comes with freedom of speech, and the issue of whether the right to gratuitously offend means the duty to do so. So, of course, we're not against free speech, but it should be with thought, with respect, and with responsibility.
Go ahead, Munir.
So what I want to say here, I mean, they use the term like belittling the alienation of Muslims is the coded word that goes to the Muslim community around the world in countries who are totally illiterate, like in Pakistan, and they are taken as a code word that some Western people are conspiring against the Muslims, using their prophet as a mocking target, and then it gives them the right to kill, and they're killed every day.
Well, you're putting a lot of words in my mouth, Munir. Sorry, you're putting a lot of words in my mouth. That's simply not the case.
But Munir, would you deny that there is...
No, hold on, Sharif. You just said that you want investigative journalism, objective journalism, and I'm very much for that. But the thing is, objectivity comes from all sides. Okay. So what I request people like you who have got the pen and the power to be objective, to bring both sides together and say people are being killed in Pakistan, in Indonesia, in Iran. You should bring in the case of Rafi Badawi.
Munir, I have been very clear.
You should bring in the case of Rafi Badawi.
I have been very clear. I have never condoned...
One moment, allow him to respond.
Munir, sorry.
Munir, let Sharif respond.
Munir, for someone who believes in freedom of speech, you interrupt quite a lot. So let me just finish. I have never condoned any attacks on freedom of speech or on minorities or anything in the developing world. I've never done that. So please, I mean, if I have an issue with discrimination against Muslims in the West, it doesn't mean that I condone those acts in Muslim countries. I mean, they are not a barometer of freedom of speech.
I think that's
so I think you're really confusing two different
Okay.
issues here.
Okay, let's Suzanne get her word in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a very important point, that when people are talking about perhaps the targeting or Islamophobia or sentiments that make groups feel belittled or vulnerable, that never be put forward as a justification or a rationale for violence. Because I think that's what is dangerous, is the idea that these things are so insulting, inflammatory, incendiary, that they can actually justify violence, so that when someone commits an attack or a murder, their action, they're not fully culpable for their action because they were provoked, they were incited to do that. I think that's a principle that we need to reject. That doesn't mean we need to reject
and this is the problem.
Respect.
Go ahead, Sharif.
And this is the problem I have, for instance, is the accusation just thrown at me is, simply for highlighting the issue of discrimination and alienation among Muslims, I am somehow kind of, it is implicit that I'm somehow condoning attacks and killings against people who offend Muslims. I mean, this shuts down the debate, and this is very dangerous, because nothing could be further than the truth. I don't justify those attacks at all. But simply highlighting this means that you imply that I'm doing that.
Munir, it is the flag of Islamophobia that shuts down the debate, okay? And I have written a column, you've written tons of things about these things. As soon as you raise the flag of Islamophobia, it sends wrong signal. I'm not saying that Islamophobia doesn't exist. It should be curtailed, it should be fought. That's why anti-racism laws are in France.
Munir,
that's why France...
Munir, I haven't
ahead.
actually used the word Islamophobia once on this program, but
It
you
is
keep
not
putting it
you,
in my
Sharif.
mouth.
I'm talking
the
about.
Fact is,
no,
the fact is,
Sharif, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say that you feel that
Munir,
I'm putting words in your mouth.
Okay, Munir, let me ask you this. Do you deny that there are many, many Muslims who live in the United States, who live in other parts of the world, who feel that they are being discriminated against? If we want to call it Islamophobia, let's call it Islamophobia, but they feel genuinely that they're being discriminated against.
I can talk to you about Canada. In Canada, Muslim lives, and you may be very surprised when I use this word, they live as a pampered minority. Okay, they have schools where all the prayers permissions are given. They have a school where fasting is allowed. They allow women with hijab to work all around without any discrimination, at least in Canada. So yes, in many places, and even in USA, when you have surveillance an issue, that the national security issues, unfortunately, because of the thing that happened around. When you say, or somebody like you say, okay, first of all, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about many people. Okay, when somebody says Osama bin Laden was there fighting for Palestinian rights, and that's why X, Y, Z, and that's a problem. Okay, Osama bin Laden was there to promote Salafist Islam all around, and we are
what does Osama bin Laden have to do with this? What does Osama bin Laden have to do with this? I'm completely confused by what you're saying.
Okay, I want to go to Suzanne.
You're confused.
Right, I want to go to Suzanne in New York. Suzanne, here's the problem. How does one draw the line here when we're talking about freedom of speech between what is, genuine freedom of speech and what is hate speech? I mean, there's a fine line there. This is a debate that's preoccupied us for a very long time. I mean, purists would say there's no difference, really.
Well, different jurisdictions treat it differently. In the United States, we have the legal standard that's most protective of freedom of speech. So we say, unless it's incitement to imminent violence, speech that goes out and tells people to start attacking, start killing very specifically, short of that, the speech is considered protected. It's considered lawful and under the umbrella of freedom of expression. In Europe and in most of the rest of the world, there is a broader standard and a broader permission to restrict speech. Something can be considered incitement to hatred, in other words, hate speech, and that can be justification to ban or prohibit it. And under U.S. law, we sort of think that's dangerous, that kind of opens the door to suppressing speech that could be part of legitimate debate. We prosecute hate crimes, but not hate speech. When we have a pastor, for example, in Florida who's threatening to burn the Quran, he doesn't get arrested, he doesn't get prosecuted, but you have Secretary of State Hillary Clinton at the time or General David Petraeus at the time telling that pastor that this is destructive, this is inimical to U.S. interests, this is an unwelcome, rejected act, and ultimately that pastor backed down. So we try to use speech to counter speech instead of legal prohibitions to counter speech wherever possible. And that's the approach, in my view, that's most protective of free expression and a free-flowing debate.
And that's where we have to end it for now. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at cctv_America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.